Hello once again. This is Civil Discourse Now. I'm Mark Small. I'm an Indianapolis attorney. I co-host this program with Paul Ogden, also an Indianapolis attorney. We are coming to you from Big Hat Books. It's located in Broad Ripple at 6510 Cornell Avenue. Broad Ripple is on the north side of Indianapolis. If you're on another continent or watching this from the International Space Station, you might not know Indianapolis very well, but it's the north side of Indianapolis. It's kind of a neat area. Big Hat Books has an excellent selection of books. They also have spaces here to rent. They have a gallery on the second floor of artwork. The G.C. Lucas Galleries has a display of local and artists from outside of the state right now. And so there's a bunch of stuff here going on. It's kind of neat.
Mark, I really like Ponzi schemes. Would they have anything here on that?
Odd that you should mention that, Paul. Yes, Crime Pays is a novel. It's a fictionalized account of a Ponzi scheme that occurred here in mid-North Indiana in the late 1960s. I wrote it, and it's available for sale here.
Oh, wow. And can you get it on Amazon.com, too?
Yes, but you know what? I prefer keeping purchases local, so if there's any way you can get by here to Big Hat Books, buy it here from Liz, and you'll see some other neat stuff here, too. Our guests today are Karen Kay Leonard, President of the League of Women Voters of Indiana, and Anthony Simons, who's a Republican Ward Chairman and Precinct Committee person here in Marion County in District 2. We've been talking about the voter ID laws here in Indiana and why we would have to have the statutes that were put in place in 2005. The statutes have changed. Anthony, what is your take on the situation? How do you view this?
Well, I think that, of course, I'm in favor of having photo ID identification. And as I said in the previous segment, I believe that fraud has definitely been probably going on before the photo ID had happened, but it's been difficult to track, I think, at times. And, you know, it's kind of like a one-time thing that it's hard to track down those people and the signatures. And I think that what this voter ID does is it instills confidence in the voting process and vote integrity into the elections. And anything we can do that, I think, would be beneficial. Now, I know that the argument on the other side is that it's difficult for people to maybe get ID, but I suggest that it's exceedingly difficult to maneuver really in today's America without having an ID. I mean, you have to do the right checks or to get even Sudafed or you know, go into a building or sometimes. And so I think that getting an ID, I think is probably easier than I think than the other side might let on. And I know Democrats have tried to show or try to find people that would say that they've been burdened by trying to say that they're not going to vote because they didn't have an ID. I know there was a case up in South Bend. There were like a group of nuns couldn't vote because they didn't have ID, but they could have used provisional. They chose not to use the provisional ballot system that we have, and they didn't do that. And so they had time though afterwards to be able to get the proper ID to be able to go there and show proof that they were who they said they were. But I think that, I mean, even, you know, a lot of people are saying that this is suppression of the vote, and the Jimmy Carter, who is a, you know, big time Democrat, you know, there was a commission that was done by the Carter-Baker Commission, and he says he was actually for vote. That commission said they were for voter ID. And there was also a former representative I found in Alabama, Arthur Davis. He was initially against it, but now he supports it. And he's a centrist black Democrat who actually turned around and endorsed this photo ID law. And so I think that with the arguments that it's suppressing the vote, we're not wanting to suppress the vote. What we're going to do is try to stop fraud as much as we can. And I think that it's not a significant burden at all. I think if people really want to vote, they're going to find a way to be able to get that ID, and they're going to vote. I really believe they could do that.
There are parts of South Carolina where one county, for instance, in which the number of people who don't have identification that is sufficient for South Carolina's voter ID law. And I think all the voter ID laws across the country, once Indiana's passed constitutional muster with the U.S. Supreme Court, started patterning laws on Indiana's. The South Carolina law would effectively preclude something like 40% of the people in one county from voting because they don't have proper identification. And those individuals aren't necessarily able to just easily then go down to the courthouse and get the ID that they need. Here, for example, in this state, there's one courthouse you go to, and so you have to go down there to present the proper identification to get the registration in. And then let's say, and that means you travel downtown in Indianapolis. We're one of only a dozen counties in the state, or maybe 20 counties in the state, that has what could be called a mass transit system. And after having lived in Chicago, I don't know that that's necessarily an applicable term. You'd have to travel downtown, take the time to travel downtown just to get that voter registration. And then you might not have the right credentials. Now you can go online, you can find out what it is that you need, but you would have to get a birth certificate perhaps that costs money, and get other documents to take down with you in order just to register to vote. And I didn't have to do that when I registered to vote.
You say, Mark, you have to go downtown to register to vote now? That's the only way you can register to vote? That's not correct.
No, but I'm giving an example of having to travel and go downtown to get the documents.
In fact, that's what they used to do in the South when they tried to prevent blacks from voting. You have to go downtown or go to the courthouse. There'd be a limited period of time that they could vote or could register to vote. And when they heard African Americans were coming to vote, they would shut the place down so they couldn't get registered. Now that is real voter suppression.
Yeah, that's
by
not,
Democrats.
And that's a lot like what happened in 2004, I believe, in Ohio, when a lot of precincts were shut down, and they happened to be in democratically strong precincts. I think we've had voter fraud by both parties in the past.
Well, but if we think we've had voter fraud and we have no proven voter fraud, why are we spending all our time and money on this issue instead of others? To me, that just does not make sense.
Well, I think it instills confidence, and I think that there's so many allegations out there throughout the whole country about fraud and abuse, and sometimes we don't, and sometimes there is evidence there, but the prosecutors aren't willing to really do much of anything because it's such a small thing at times.
But why don't we spend our energy trying to help those people who need an ID get one, instead of fussing about the fact that people are worried that there's fraud that we have not proven nor shown.
And I would be for looking at ways that we can make it even easier for people to get ID. I think, if that is a problem, and I can, with the burden, I would be all for in trying to make it as easy as we can to
and
make sure we
yet,
get
what's
ID.
coming down the pipe? Something we call secure ID and the nation calls real ID, which is going to impair every woman who has ever changed her name from easily being able to get the ID that will let you go into federal buildings and on airplanes.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that enough to talk about it. In terms of...
And maybe that's important.
Right, that is interesting.
We're lawyers. We're ignorant of that.
And I assume this is something Congress is looking at passing it.
The real ID is a Transportation Security Administration result, and I think 2017 may be when the actual date is supposed to be. But for women who have changed their names, or men who have changed theirs, the business of furnishing certified documentation of every name change is more than a little bit complex.
I'm sure that's true. But the states wouldn't be required to use that for voting purposes.
Not for voting.
Not for voting.
No, but it could be anticipated that they would. And here's a question that I have. We're looking at all these concerns about making sure that we instill confidence in the voting system and that people will trust the voting system. Well, then one question I have is, why are all these pushes for having stricter requirements on identification, why are they all coming from one party?
Because most of the allegations of fraud are inner city Democratic areas.
And
that's
when
Chicago, you mentioned a perfect example. Lake County.
Well, Lake County is Gary, and Chicago is Cook County over in Illinois.
Right.
But I read the assessment of voting in Wisconsin in the 2008 election when allegations of fraud were raised. The audit that was done concluded that there were 27 instances in which individuals voted illegally. They should, and in each of those instances, those people were voting in precincts in which they shouldn't have voted. They thought they should have. It's where they used to live.
And in Indiana, we have a Secretary of State who voted in a precinct that's being argued about. So, you know, there's the possibility of that kind of problem everywhere.
Well, and the total number, though, the total number is 27 people out of, I forget the number of votes cast in Wisconsin. I believe it was about 4 million in the 2008 general. I could be wrong about that. But it was less than a hundredth of a percentile. And so...
Why do you assume the fraud there would necessarily be the same as what might be in Chicago or Gary or a place like that?
I'm giving as an example a place where people did make allegations of fraud, and there was such a big push through the legislature to get restrictions placed on voting. And that was one of Scott Walker's.
Right, and I have trouble with the whole term restrictions on voting. No one's restricted from voting. The question is, do they have an ID? I would say, let's be reasonable and compromise. As some of our viewers have commented, I'm the more reasonable one of the two of us.
One of our viewers commented. I won't tell you what the others said. They were too polite.
Okay, I think the ID requirement right now is too restrictive. It's got to be a government ID. I would open up and say, well, if you got an ID from a college, maybe that'd be okay. Other types of ID, but just go back. I want to go back to the signature requirement, where you can just go in and sign your name and vote. Is just I think is pie in the sky.
Well,
we're gone a long ways from that.
In Indiana, as long as the state colleges put an expiration date on the ID, you can use that photo ID at the polls. The problem originally was that the Purdue and Indiana universities did not have an expiration date.
And I don't quite understand the expiration point. I mean, your face doesn't expire.
Well,
No, because you never have to stop being a college student.
I believe it has something to do with the same thing as the signature change that you were talking about. Your face does change in the sense that you look a little different at 40 than you did at 20. So
I don't.
maybe
He looked bad then.
But I think that you know, what we require in terms of the photo ID in Indiana is that your name correspond reasonably to the name on the poll book, that it have an expiration date, that it be distributed by a government agency, and that it have your photograph on it. Now, it doesn't say anything about address, and we've just been talking about the fact that part of the problem with voter fraud may be that somebody doesn't live in the precinct that he or she tries to vote in.
And I'd be okay even with an affidavit backup. Someone shows up, they don't have their wallet, sign an affidavit backup, which I don't think we have now. You'd have to do it as provisional. And
Provisional ballot, yeah.
Which I think is a hassle.
And going down really does mean going downtown. In
Right.
that case,
And how many people are going to do that?
To the Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
That's correct.
It means taking the ID
Correct.
to the clerk's office.
Right. So,
We're at the end of our second segment. We'll be right back.
okay.
Crime